welcome back to Life Enrichment with Hank Ballinger. Today we want to talk about the idea of interest rates being higher, which means you can only afford a smaller house. With interest rates going up, means you can afford, a lot of people have to buy a smaller house. Now, how does that work? Well, as you know, starting at the beginning of 2023, Jerome Powell really aggressively, no, this was back in 2022, Jerome Powell started aggressively raising interest rates. Now, what that does is it raises what's called the Fed's funds rates, which is what all loans are tied to, which means the home loan, the business loans, all loans are going up in their cost. And we're going to look at that today and see how that affects you as maybe a home buyer or a business buyer if you're trying to buy real estate to build wealth. So we're going to look at that today and see exactly how that affects you and how you can figure up how much that will affect you on your home loan. Very important. But before we get into that, again, I'd like to say thank you for those who watch the channel. Encourage others to watch it. We greatly appreciate that. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Really helps us. Also encourage others to watch us on Facebook or on YouTube, but tell them on Facebook, get the word out. We would really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Now, as Jerome Powell raises the interest rate, it raises the interest rate on all loans. So that's very important. Even America, all nations around the world have debt. And even they are affected by interest rates. Now, we're not going to get massively into macroeconomics, just a little bit. We're going to get wade in the water of macroeconomics. I like macro. I don't generally get very deep into it on this channel because we want to do some very basic stuff. Just encourage the average person to get out of the rat race, to start buying real estate. But we do need to talk about this because it's becoming very prevalent in our day, and for those who want to buy houses and those who want to build wealth in real estate. So let's look at this. Let's say you have a $100,000 house and you put it on a 30-year. Now, if you're buying, and this is your primary residence, the one you're going to live in, that means you can put that debt on a 30-year amortization. Means it's going to take you 30 years to pay it off. You realize only America, I think America is the only country in the world that has 30-year loans. Now, they are thinking about, several places right now, going to 40-year loans. Crazy idea, but nonetheless, that's what they're thinking about, going to 40-year amortized, meaning it'd take you 40 years to pay them. So that could be coming down the pipe before long. But right now, most banks will do a 30-year loan on your primary residence. So let's say you have a $100,000 loan. It's going to take you 30 years to pay it, but your interest rate is 3%. Your payment on that house to the bank will be $421. That's pretty good. Not bad. Pretty good. But let's say you take the same loan. See, we have the same amount here, $100,000, still taking you 30 years to pay it off. But let's say the interest rate goes from 3% to 7%, which is what a lot of banks are at right now, 7 or above. So if the interest rate is at 7%, that payment is now $665. Now, if you look at what it was, $421, and take that away from what it is now, you will notice the difference in that payment just by going up from 3% to 7%. That payment difference is $244 a month. Just by the interest rate going up 3 percentage points, or what's called 300 basis points. Some people say BIPs, some say BPs, some say whatever, but 300 basis points is 3%. For every percent, there's 100 basis points. So the interest rate goes up 300 basis points, or 3%, and your payment is now $244 more, or 58% increase, meaning you're paying half again as much on that payment just because the interest rate went from 3% to 7%. Now, let's look at something. That's on a $100,000 home. Across America, the median price of a home is well in excess of $300,000, and I think depending on who you look at in social media, YouTube, whatever, if you look it up, Google it, whatever, I think a lot of places will probably say the median house price is $400 and something, but we're not going that high because in Kentucky, where I'm from, it's not that high, not the median. But let's look at a $300,000 home. The same number, a 3% interest here, a 7% interest here. Now, what's the difference in that rate? Here you have a $300,000 home, 3%, amortized on 30 years. It's going to take you 30 years to pay it off. Here, the same home, $300,000, 30 years, 7% interest rate. Here, your payment at 3% would have been $1,265 a month. Here, it's $1,995 a month. That's a lot of difference. If you take this number from this number, you will notice your house payment on that $300,000 house went up $730 a month. Now that's a lot of extra payment. From $1,265 to $1,995 is a $730 difference, or 57.7% increase. That's a lot of increase. So it's about a 58% increase this way. But let me show you how many people in America decide what size house they can buy, or how big or how much of a house they can buy. They look at their expenses and they say, okay, we can afford, and on average, people across America, especially in this area and other areas that may be doing pretty good, they will say, okay, we can afford a $2,000 a month payment. Okay, we're going with $2,000. Some areas, a lot more. People are a lot more affluent. The places pay more, maybe like New York, LA, Chicago, Florida, Texas. Some of these places, a lot more. But in this area and other places, let's say $2,000 a month is a standard payment. Now let me show you what happens. If you said we can afford $2,000 a month, here, if you have a $475,000 house at 3% interest and on 30 years, your house payment is going to be $2,003. You'd say, well, we can afford that. We get a $400,000 house. But when your interest rate goes from 3% to 7%, look at how much a house you can afford now. $301,000. So the fact that the interest rate went up says you're going to have to buy a smaller house. If you set a price on a house as to how much payment you can have, the interest rate going up means you're going to have to buy a smaller home. Here you could afford a $475,000 home at 3%, but at 7% you can only afford a $301,000 home and almost the same payment. Almost. If you look at it nuts and bolts, it's probably just very little difference on the change, but it's about a $2,003 payment just because the interest rate went up 3 percentage points. That means you can get a 37% smaller home. Over a one-third smaller home just because the interest rate went up 3%. Now, why is that important? There's a lot of people will buy this home right here and the interest rate's small, but they don't read the fine print. Sometimes when you buy a home, they have what's called a teaser rate. That rate may only be small for the first 5 years or the first 3 years or the first 7 years, and after that, it will go up to 7% or 8% or whatever the standard market is at the time. If the standard market went up to 10%, they could. Now, sometimes the verbiage when you buy it says it can't exceed 3% or 5%, but different banks are different. And different times banks do different things. So you got to be real careful when you buy a home at 3%. Make sure that 3% is locked in for the life of the home. And many people did that when the prime rate or the Fed fund rate was at 0 and people were getting home loans for 2% and some commercial loans for 3 and 4%, we had a lot of commercial loans at 3.75, 4.15. Can't get that now. Things change. So just make sure that in the reading that you lock this in. If you're going to get this, you don't want to be paying this much and think you can afford that $475,000 house from now on. But then when the interest rate goes up, you say, we can't afford that because the payment went up too. Almost half again as much, 58%. So it's very important that you read that. Now, let's say you want to buy income producing property. Okay, you want to buy some apartments or some houses that you can rent out. So let's just say you buy a $1 million property. That's going to be in today's market around Richmond, Kentucky. It's going to be about 14 units. Now that's C-type property. That's not A or B. A or B, you're going to get less units for that same $1 million. You're going to charge more, but that's just what the market is right now. So you buy a $1 million property, you put $200,000 down, you have an $800,000 debt service to the bank, and on 25 years, most of the time they won't go 30 or more. You got to get government loans, Fannie and Freddie, to be higher. So you get a 25-year loan at 7%, your payment, your debt service to the bank is $5,655, which is your biggest payment. If you look down through here, by far your biggest payment. Your tax is going to be roughly $835, your insurance $630, your garbage $70, that's going to vary depending on where you're at, and your maintenance about $400, about $100 per unit per month. Could be a little more, could be a little less, depending on your structure. So your total expenses is $8,590. Now, let's say you're charging $725 on this, all 14 units or 2 bedrooms, and you're charging $725. Your income will be $10,125 a month. Now, remember your expenses right here. You take your income minus your expenses, you're left with $1,535 a month. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good cash flow. But let's say you do this. Let's say you take your rent from $725. Maybe you bought that property a few years ago, but you have raised that rents now to where you have got the rents up to $900 a month. $900. You were at $725, now you're at $900. Now look at your income, $12,600. Your expenses are $8,590. See, the debt service that you had on that property, maybe you've got it locked in for several years, 5-7 year, what's called an ARM, and it's going to wait 5 to 7 years before the interest rate on that property goes up. So your expenses stays this much, but because you can raise rent on income producing property, your rent was $725, now it's $900. Your income is now $12,600, but your expenses stayed the same. So now your cash flow, your income minus your expenses, your cash flow is now $4,000, where it used to be $1,500. Now again, do you see the difference in the wealthy and the poor and the middle class? The wealthy people, inflation and things going up helps them. The poor and the middle class, generally inflation or things going up higher usually hurts them on the size of the property and on the payment on the property. But the wealthy, generally the inflation or things going up, it generally helps them. So if you want to get into income producing real estate, I encourage you to do that. Every time there's inflation kind of helps you. Okay? So just think about this. A higher interest rate generally for a lot of people means a smaller home. Now, not that that's a good thing, a bad thing, that's just the way it is. So you may want to plan on that and keep an eye on interest rates when you're buying property. You look at all this kind of stuff, put that in the mix, plan really well, you can become Redneck Rich. See you on the next video.